So thanks for coming to the closing plenary for Dell World. My name is Aarti. I'm a reporter for NPR. I report on technology. And as I've observed it, we are basically wiping the internet on everything. In the last year, I've had the chance to visit 10 different countries. And I recall in one country I went to, Tunisia, for example, meeting a young man who was 24 years old. He'd never owned a computer until he was about 18 or 19. And he figured out, having grown up on a farm, that if you put sensors on the refrigerators when there is a blackout, you can actually remotely figure out if the temperature is too low and your crop is going to go bad. So that's like a very simple use of IoT that he developed really hacking on his farm in Tunisia. I've also interviewed people, for example, in competitive sports. With the America's Cup, I've gotten to interview sailors from the Emirati team New Zealand who, after they finish playing and sailing and the blood, sweat, and tears that go into that, when they're back processing how the game went, they're not just getting feedback from their coach, they're getting feedback from engineers on how they perform given how the sensors give feedback on their performance and their work. And then just last week, I actually got to drive a Tesla Model S that was semi-automated. I actually wasn't sure how automated it was, so either me or the car, I'm not sure which combination of me and the car, we almost hit someone, but didn't. And we'll talk about that later, candidly. And so the point of this panel is basically to talk about the Internet of Things, the promises, the applications, the way it's being used in enterprise and for the consumer, and then talk about things about it that are inspiring and maybe also scary, because it's the mix of things, right? And it's clearly one area where arguably technology is outpacing our ability to process it, manage it, regulate it, use it. And so we're going to have 6 people on the panel today. My job is to facilitate that, and their job is to be interesting. Great. Now that we're seated, I'll go ahead and introduce each of you briefly. Aneesh Chopra is co-founder of Hunch Analytics and also former CTO of the United States. Geoff McGrath is with McLaren Applied Technologies. We have Joyce Mullen with Dell OEM Solutions, Alexis Ohanian with Reddit, Michael Raynor with Deloitte Services LLP, and Paul Rogers with GE Wurldtech. Thanks for joining us.
Great.
So I want to just start with, it's a question that really any of you can answer, and I'm assuming all of you can answer very well. In terms of investments in IoT or use cases that are particularly exciting to you, I mean, what's caught your eye? Quickly.
When you think in terms of GE, when we think in IoT, we look at it from an asset perspective, so the industrial internet. And so we've made $1 billion investment on the West Coast to go after that market. When you look at the numbers, which are extremely exciting, you have 50 billion assets being connected by 2020 with $15 trillion worth of GDP value by 2030, and that's with a T.
And use cases, applications that excite you?
Well, I guess something that I find fascinating is not the particular use case, but the way in which different technologies are being commercialized. I spent a lot of time thinking about different pathways for commercializing different innovations. After you mentioned the Tunisian refrigerator example, that's what I would call a potentially disruptive innovation, a way to start out at the fringes of a hard problem and sneak up on those hard problems from the side. There are other applications that are much more almost moonshot in their audacity, some of what you described with GE. You put sensors on a jet engine or a locomotive, that stuff's got to work first time. And then there are other problems where we're taking both approaches simultaneously. You mentioned the autonomous car. Sometimes it's going after the mainstream right out of the blocks, and sometimes it's driving combines in empty fields. A very different kind of problem, very different approach to solving a hard problem.
I think about this mostly as an early stage tech investor, and I'm just excited to finally have the future arrive, the one that I was promised in movies. I think for me in particular, I was really excited to see the Model S demo, in part because a company that I invested in called Cruise was doing a very similar road test about 5 months ago, and that's an upstart in the Valley. It's so cool to see so many smart, well-funded people trying to solve this problem that I really believe is going to make our roads a lot safer and make our lives a lot better.
I love it when we find new applications and we're able to instrument environments that we would never have thought possible. So my favorite example is the connected cow. We have worked with a dairy.
You've all heard of.
Connected cow. We've worked with a dairy in India to try to figure out the behavior and the genealogy and the eating and drinking habits of the perfect dairy cow. And when farmers know what that cow looks like, they can farm to that outcome and increase their milk production. It's a great example.
Well, at McLaren, we've been racing connected cars for over a decade, and what we learned from that is, in a completely controlled environment with interoperability, we can use data to drive intelligence that drives decision support for strategy in race, and ultimately allows us to inform models that help us accelerate the development of the system through immersive simulation, in both cases keeping a human in the loop. Now that approach inspired us to go to a far more complicated application in oil and gas, offshore drilling, where basically we treat the driller like the driver, and we get the data from downhole on the rig where the garage crew, you could say, is operating. Then we integrate that in real time to the onshore operations control unit. It's inspired by racing, but it's orders of magnitude more complex. But it only took us 2 years to go from concept to production, actually now going global out of Houston.
And if I may, just to take this in context, yesterday the President unveiled the strategy for American innovation and once again reiterated that infrastructure in the modern economy includes digital assets. And so you're going to see a lot more continued investment in what I believe to be smarter cities and other foundational infrastructure that can be part of applications. But this is also about the problems that we're looking to solve. In healthcare, we believe that 30% of the spend is not valuable. And the opportunity for the IoT to help keep people in the home longer without having to go to the hospital is a huge opportunity, just as the President's goal to get doubling of our energy productivity levels so we can extract more value for the energy we do produce in the home or in the office.
A huge opportunity, but also some hype around it, right? So when I think about, for example, in the health and fitness space, I can track my steps, and then I can gamify the tracking of my steps. So it's not just a pedometer, but it's suddenly a competition with all of my loved ones or my mile time or whatever. But beyond gamification, what exactly are we getting? Like, what kind of interesting data analytics are we getting in health and fitness in particular, maybe to start with?
Maybe I'll just start to get down on this piece because this is a critical opportunity. The idea that we're going to be quantifying ourselves is interesting, but in the context of how people are engaging the healthcare system, we're going to see a different model. A healthcare organization now that's responsible for your entirety of your care may be actually prescribing that you sensor up the home or sensor up your loved one because they want to be more aware of an alert to keep you from falling sicker. So it may be a prescription for a sensor or monitor that the doctor and their care team is engaging with you so that they can keep you safer at home, as opposed to just we all individually have put up our...
And the idea being that you're not always at the doctor's office, and so a way to extend the ability to see what's happening with you when you're not there.
And the point of the punchline here is that there's a business model. The government's now giving you a check. If you're a doctor that keeps people out of the hospital, you make more money keeping people healthier. And so with a business model, a problem to solve, and data, you're going to see those combinations emerge into...
And we have a bunch of customers working on creating products and solutions to meet those needs right now.
Yes.
So examples include things like HealthNet Connect, where you can understand after you've been discharged from the hospital whether the patient is taking their medication on time. The way they do that is by instrumenting a pill box. And if the patient doesn't take the pill, they get a call from their provider or their nurse, and they say, hey, don't take your medicine. And the readmission rates to hospitals with that solution are down by 30%. So it actually works.
You need to do that with flossing.
Yeah, you can do it with flossing.
There's such a stratification in the maturities of industries. So when you look at taking data analytics from a jet engine that's in flight and how important and technologically advanced that is, and then compare it to an industry like oil and gas, when you think in terms of oil fields, we had a solution where we went to an oil field customer and we were super excited. It was very advanced. It was going to optimize the oil field. We gave our presentation, talked about timing and cost. We all high-fived that we had nailed it. And the question back to us was, that is great, we see that as the future, but could you tell us if the equipment is on? And so we did that. You know, how long would it take to tell us if it's on or not? Well, then you get back to the value of on, off. It took them 3 weeks to understand whether a drill rig was down or not. That's 3 weeks of lost production. So a week's worth of technology working with this customer saved millions of dollars for something as simple as on-off.
I think that's a great example of the challenge that we've not risen to yet. It's the design challenge. It's knowing the questions you answer that have the most impact. If you're not giving me meaningful insights about me, that gadget on my wrist is useless, and usually the algorithms in the cloud are aggregating across a population. They're not profiling me. To do that, you need machine learning, and that's a massive data problem at every individual in the
We
population.
will talk about machine learning. One thing I do want to drill down into that I think, I interview a lot of startup entrepreneurs, and I think that there's this idea, there's this inherent excitement around, look at all the sensors I've built into this thing. There's so much enthusiasm in it. Not as much thought on the data design as you call it, on what are you doing with this. Are there ever instances where actually it's just better to collect less data? Like focus, do less, and here's what you get with it. Do you have any examples of that?
Absolutely. We did some work with the English rugby squad. We started out trying to analyse how training translated to poor performance in a game, not pure science. We set out with body area networks, satellite tracking for motion, and building up very complex algorithms to assess the work rate from these players. We now use $3 sensors that we can extract very meaningful insight from the minimum amount of data, process it locally so we don't need any bandwidth for transmission, and we get very, very good correlation down to an individual about how that individual is likely to perform in the future. If you could apply that into our everyday lives, then I think you will have cracked something, but it's complex.
We'll see founders who get very seduced by this idea of, oh, look what I can do, and not actually solving a meaningful problem with it. Right. And I think that's where we see a lot of these kind of like stocking stuffer ideas that may make for a really interesting, like, hey, here's what I got you this year, but never get much use beyond that.
What we find we have about 130 or so proofs of concept in process right now. What we're finding an awful lot of the time is a customer is trying to solve a specific problem, they think. And then as they start to look at the data, the problem set actually expands or contracts depending on the use case. But they don't always know going into the project exactly what they're trying to get done. And I think part of our job is to help sort of ferret that out early enough, because you can waste a ton of time and a ton of money if you do that.
There's a lot of data out there, and there's a lot of time spent thinking about how do I ingest all of this data. But in the industrial world, only or less than 1% of all the data collected from all of the hundreds of millions of sensors is actually used in analytics. 1%.
That sounds high to me, that sounds high to me because there's just so much out there.
Which then when you think in terms of using that data, it actually gives credence to some of the GDP numbers that we're talking about.
But that is why, though, it's really important, as you described, to do some of that analytics at the edge, because you don't want to move all that useless data all around.
And you need very little to have a big impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to be careful, it seems, when you're collecting enormous amounts of data and using a very small amount of it. There's a tendency to think that, well, it's cheap to collect and cheap to store, it's got enormous option value, why not just do it? Except for the fact that having all of those data actually creates a risk, because it sits there waiting to be hacked, waiting to be stolen, creating all different points of entry. Sort of really down. Everybody's so excited I can do something. So it's a real issue.
I mean, it's the Office of Personnel Management learned that. I mean, there was a real question of the federal government about why did they digitize and store the most classified, sensitive things that you actually didn't need on the cloud. It could have been in paper. So that's arguably one lesson from that hack. We're going to take questions from the audience via Twitter. If you want to tweet in your questions, #DellWorld, we'll take them and I'll start to take a look. And one other question I have on this, in terms of analytics and the way it works, as a consumer, as a citizen, does analytics ever work against me or does it always work for me? Like, I'm curious, are there perverse outcomes or should I just love it because it's more info?
It can go either way, of course, right? That these technologies can be deployed. Sometimes consumers make out like bandits. Look at what Craigslist did to the newspaper business, took billions of dollars in classified ad revenue, turned it into tens of millions of dollars in revenue. Massive consumer surplus, but the industry wasn't so happy. It can go the other way, potentially. If you look at the insurance business, for example, I think insurance companies would be well advised to think about where the center of gravity lies and who has the power in that relationship. It starts out with, put this widget in your car, give me data on your driving behavior, and as a result of now being able to measure your actual riskiness as opposed to using your credit score as a proxy, I'll reduce your insurance rates. Well, that's terrific, but I got bad news for everyone here. 50% of you are below the median, and so it doesn't always work out for everybody, and that's a problem. I don't have a glib answer, especially given the context, but it's something I think we're taking very seriously.
One of the opportunities is to revisit the idea of privacy and essentially the rights that we have when we interact with these technologies. And one of the questions that we tried to grapple with in the last several years is, can we build a framework that allows individuals control over the use of this information, and a compact that would say, you're only going to collect what I'm authorizing you to collect. So there's a little bit more implicit understanding around what it is that you're doing and how and why.
By compact, do you mean industry standard or do you mean law?
Well, our model was that there'd be a baseline fair information practice standard, and that part of that standard would be that the individual has the control over the use of the data that has been collected on their behalf, and that the organization is going to collect the minimum necessary to perform its function. And so the idea is, we obviously don't have a universal privacy law in this country. We do in healthcare with HIPAA and educational records and the like. And so could we have at least a baseline protection that would give us more tools to control that information in the digital age? That's not law. We don't have that law. We did advocate for that to be law, and we hope the industry will continue to move, if even in voluntary industry enforceable codes of conduct, which gets you further down the road.
Can I bring back to the question on analytics? I think there's no doubt that using real-time analytics that are predictive, you can make the human more likely to make the right decision, especially if it's a mission-critical operation and there's time pressure. But the driver for this is, in some industries we can't hire enough people to actually manage the complex operations. The threat is, if you use machine learning early and you start building up and codifying this knowledge and recognizing the patterns that we think of typical of an experienced operator, but now codifying that reaction, suggesting interventions and knowing the outcome, at what point is the human's intervention less important than the suggestion from the code? So we're not at that crossover point yet, but it's a world that's moving extremely fast, and IoT is just fueling that initiative.
I do want to talk about that in a bit because I need to process what happened last week as well with
Okay.
Tesla. In terms of, I mean, one thing I think about in terms of law and policy is, do smart devices raise unique kinds of oversight issues? So for example, over the summer, Fiat Chrysler had to recall 1.4 million Jeeps, and the way that the software holes got put on the radar was not by a regulatory agency combing through all of the software that was in cars. It was by two independent hackers who figured this out and then frankly dramatized it in a way that you had to pay attention because it was dramatized.
You read it, yeah.
Yeah, and so.
Well, let me be precise. We've grappled with capability across the regulatory agencies. Some have more talent than others when it comes to these emerging technologies. In fact, we put together a bit of an emerging technologies, kind of a baseline approach. One of the models that we're seeing is that this is irresponsible for many of these agencies. So the Food and Drug Administration is thinking about its role in the digital health ecosystem, and it's trying to strike the balance of not overly regulating, but allowing for there to be some more transparency and disclosure. So you'll see, for example, the rise of open government data for regulatory purposes. The Consumer Protection Bureau has invited every American to submit their complaints about financial products that may not be designed to do the right thing. And rather than just having the regulators read all of that material, we've opened up all of that so that others could join in the cause of mining it for patterns, so that maybe an ill-timed recommendations engine that was steering you to higher fees or to a worse economic outcome for your family now might be caught earlier in the regulatory process because of that openness.
Right.